Hello and welcome to this video on fundraising strategy, brought to you by Kingston Fundraising and Management. We are a strategic consultancy working in the areas of fundraising, impact management and financial strategy, and we advise charities and non-profit from all over the UK and internationally. We're part of the Kingston Smith group, which amongst other things is an auditor of charities, hundreds of charities around the UK, and we are regularly voted #1 by our clients as the best charity auditor out there. Before we jump into the fundraising strategy video, which should last for about an hour, we'd just like to spend a little bit of time introducing ourselves so you can see who your presenters are.
Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. So you can just put a face to a voice throughout the duration. My name is Emma. I work at Kingston Smith as a fundraising consultant, and I've been doing that for around about 9 months now. But prior to that, I had various roles, predominantly in-house actually, with lots of different charities, small, medium and large. And I worked on the ground doing the legwork, the actual fundraising, and I've also worked with teams managing predominantly community and corporate fundraising streams, helping them meet their targets and devising fundraising strategy. And I really hope that it will benefit your charities and your fundraising efforts. So yeah, enjoy it, and I hope you get the very best out of it you can.
Great, thanks Emma. And so I'm Dan Fletcher. I've been at Kingston Smith for about 6 years now as a fundraising consultant, and before that a number of years working within the sector, running fundraising teams in mainly health and social care charities, and learning the ropes of fundraising and fundraising strategy during that time. So what we put together is a bit of a fundraising 101, and it will hopefully cover lots of useful things for you to think about in terms of making sure that your strategy is as good as it can be.
Our agenda for today then is to think about the importance of strategy, and I'm going to start off with a few thoughts on that, and then Emma's going to conclude that section. We're going to talk about a fundraising plan and the fundraising cycle, and then spend quite a lot of time thinking about your case of support. And by the end of this, we hopefully will have presented enough information that you'll be able to put your learning into practice. And we've got a couple of exercises along the way, where you can stop the video, have a think about your organisation, and then carry it on again once you've turned some of that learning into practice. So firstly, when it comes to a fundraising strategy, there are some core things that it's helpful to understand, and one of those things that you should understand is the context that your fundraising strategy sits within. The image in front of you shows a couple of boats, a couple of ships, and it's one that I like to ponder on when it comes to thinking about strategy and thinking about the best way to be with your strategy. The boat on the right is sitting on top of this promontory. It looks as if a bit has fallen off the front of it, off the bow, and it's covered in ivy. Its sails are battered and torn. It's not going anywhere. It's not working very well as a ship at all. The boat on the left has its sails billowing. There's a bow wave of white horses in front of it. It's clearly moving fast. It's moving in a direct way. It knows where it's going, and it's being effective and efficient. And so this is how you can think about fundraising strategy. It's better to be going somewhere than not to be going anywhere at all, like the boat on the right. And it's better that even if you are going in the wrong direction with your strategy, if you do have a strategy and you have an idea of where you're going, you can shift that strategy. And in fact, a yacht like this one will need to tack left and right depending on which way the winds blow, where the currents are, and that's going to change as it goes along. It knows where it wants to get to, and it's going to have to change its plan along the way, and then even along the way where it wants to get to may change as well, but it's nimble enough and agile enough to be able to do that. The boat on the right isn't going to go anywhere. It doesn't have any capacity to go anywhere. It's stuck. So I'd encourage you to think about the boat on the left when it comes to your fundraising strategy, and we're going to talk through some of the principles a little later, which will help you to be that boat on the left. But as I said earlier, context is important as well with a strategy, and your strategy will change depending on the context. And this graph on the axis on the left is about the value of income being generated through your fundraising strategy, and the lower axis is time. And this is a graph which represents what typically happens during a period of activity as we are at the moment, where a crisis such as coronavirus has hit. So where the crisis hits, then that is a time when often income drops slightly, but with any luck, and in most cases, income then starts to rise quite steeply. People respond to the crisis. People are generous. Organisations are generous, and that generosity is often quite significant. And that amount of income goes up, and then at some point it peaks, it plateaus, and it starts to go down again. The length of time that it takes to peak will depend on how long the crisis goes on for, how long it's in the news agenda, and news agenda and people's awareness is one of the key factors in encouraging their generosity and helping them to continue to see the need that your charity is able to meet, and how you're able to meet that. But at some point, sadly, the amount of money does start to go down, follows the red arrow. And typically the amount of money that you generate will go down to a lower level than before the crisis, because typically after a crisis the country goes into a period of recession, and there's strong reasons why individuals and organisations are able to give you less than they were able to give before. And so then there's a period where there is a trough, and the length of that trough, how long that goes on for, will depend on how long the recessionary period lasts and what happens during that time. And as you can see there, the graph goes down, it carries on going down, and then at some point it starts to tip and to go up again slightly. And you can see then the graph does go up and does ultimately end on a higher position than it was before. But there's also a potential second graph that it could follow, and this is maybe the sort of reflects the K-type recession that people have been talking about with an upper leg and a lower leg of the K, because charities that don't necessarily respond as well to the crisis, that don't ask their donors for support, don't change their strategy and flex to the needs that the context demands, they are possibly going to end up on the lower dashed line, where the level of income drops even more. It does ultimately go up a bit, but it doesn't reach the levels that it could have reached if the fundraising had been done better, and it doesn't reach the levels of income that the charity was receiving pre-crisis, pre-COVID in this case. And so they're clearly, it is important to be strategic and to flex your fundraising strategy according to the conditions that you're in, and to recognize that there is a risk that if you don't, you may not recover, and you won't recover very well, and you'll have to make some drastic changes. But with every crisis and with every down period, there is a point of inflection when things start to come back up again, and the red arrow indicates where so the rate of growth is starting to accelerate, and that's a point where your strategy needs to flex again. You need to stop using the strategy of a recession and start using a strategy which reflects the ability of your donors to give more, the ability of your donors to respond and want to help you to climb out of that down period, and to increase your income and also increase your expenditure and do more things. And if you do that well, and if your appeals and your fundraising responds adequately to the kind of right messaging at that point in time, then there's a good chance that as you see, your income will go up and you will raise more than you did before the recession and before the crisis hit as well.
Thanks, Dan. So you've got me, Emma, talking to you now for around about 10 minutes, and I am following on from Dan's presentation and going to a little bit more detail about fundraising strategy, and to provide some guidance to everyone out there around how you can build a fundraising plan. So this is about trying to generate income that follows the block line that Dan referred to in his part of the presentation, and not the dash line, so that you're ultimately maximizing that fundraising income for your organizations. And I'm going to do that by splitting the approach into 4 sections, just to make it a bit easier to follow. So the first area I'm going to talk about, you'll hopefully be pleased to know, is simplicity. And I wanted to touch on this initially because I think there's a perception out there that a fundraising strategy can take months, if not years, to put together, that then there needs to be lots of data capture involved, and it's complicated. But actually, it doesn't need to be that complicated. And the best fundraising strategies are the simple ones, which understand where your organisation is at this point in time and represent where you are going. And it's just a simple map of where you are now, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. And there are 3 questions you can ask which help you keep your strategy simple. And if you can know the answer to these things, then that will really help. Now, the first question is understanding what your business model is. So ask yourself, how do you put your business model together? What do you do as an organisation in order to get money in and spend the money to get money out again? Do you have a model where you have a core earned income, and that earned income is reasonably stable, and fundraising income comes in above and beyond that, which allows you to invest in new developments? So it might be a capital appeal to build a new wing of a hospice, or it might be an estate that's falling into disrepair. So fundraising income is there to provide you with that extra bit of income in order to rectify that. Or alternatively, do you have a model where fundraising income is actually more crucial, and you wouldn't be able to hit your budget at the end of the year if you didn't receive that income? And without the fundraised income, you're unable to survive. And it's not about developments, but it's about paying the bills on a month-by-month basis. So understanding your business model, understanding where your fundraising income fits into that, is crucial when it comes to putting together your fundraising strategy. And this links into the next question. What are your key priorities now? Not what was your strategy at the beginning of the year, but what do you really need to do now in terms of income generation? Now, this is particularly prevalent now as organisations may be in a completely different place to what they envisaged, how they envisioned they would be in January this year, when the world felt like a totally different place. And for many organisations, it's all about cash. Cash is king, and keeping your cash flow going ensures you have enough money coming in so you can pay the bills you need to pay. And managing that cash flow, making sure you're minimising that expenditure where you can. And if your business model revolves around fundraising income, funding new developments that might happen in a year or 2, that's probably not going to match your key priorities at the moment. So the third question is, does your fundraising strategy match your key priorities? So does it fit with the business model at this moment in time? And if it doesn't, you need to change your fundraising strategy, and your fundraising strategy needs to be aligned with those key priorities. So if it's cash, you need to think about what you're going to do to bring cash in now. So is there something you can invest in where the return will be quick in order to make a surplus which you can use to pay off some of your other expenses? And lastly, just a warning really, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture will be simple, it will be core to your organisation. Your key priorities will be one of the things that drives that culture. And if that is your overriding way of working and it's different to that of your strategy, then it will be inevitably eaten for breakfast. So be warned. Just going to go on to the second area now, and that's agility. So we need to be able to move at pace, possibly even more so now than past times, because things are changing so quickly. So we need to know what to take and what to leave behind, and to be able to understand what is changing and how you can respond to that. The fact that this training session is taking place virtually rather than face to face demonstrates that how we would have worked maybe back in January this year is different to what works now. And the sort of fundraising you are doing now be different to what would have worked and been successful a few months ago. You need to be able to keep the core parts of your fundraising message, but be able to adapt and be able to leave things behind. And lastly, don't jettison things forever. That means don't drop them in the long term. So for example, in a year or two's time, we'll be hopefully going back to more face-to-face interactions, which may mean you can reinstate those more traditional fundraising events such as gala dinners, Tough Mudders. So think about picking things up if it makes sense to do so in the future, given market conditions. Now I'm going to go on to the next area, the third one of 4, which is authenticity. So authenticity, and I mean, it may be an interesting or surprising thing to think about when it comes to putting a fundraising strategy together, but authenticity, or how you communicate with your donors, is becoming increasingly important. And particularly in this time, as people become suspicious of authority, they're less trusting of all sorts of things, and the way that branding and marketing perhaps has worked in the past is starting to fail to some extent. And people don't necessarily believe in brands now. They believe in what people say about that brands. So you need to know what's at your core for yourself and the core personality of your charity. And you need to have that real sense of purpose which drives you and gives you a stronger chance of success in fundraising. Think about what it is that makes your organisation different to a commercial organisation. Why don't you simply raise or generate income to provide profits to your shareholders? That's part of the purpose, and why you exist, and drilling into that purpose will help you find the best way to fundraise and be authentic in your fundraising. Now I'm going to go on to the fourth area, which is our last area. So the area is inclusivity. And it's an area that's becoming increasingly important, particularly at a time when people are really thinking about some of the premises and the ways of working, which have been there in the past, but maybe are no longer are appropriate or relevant in the future. So a movement like Black Lives Matter is a good example, or a way of thinking about changing your organisation. But there are other ways to think about issues of diversity and where privilege and power come into that. And strategy can often come into concepts of privilege and power, but it doesn't have to, and it really is at odds with common sense that strategy is just the domain of those in power. So I'd encourage you very much, when you're thinking about your strategy, to crowdsource for insights. Anyone can help you when putting your strategy together. You can get insights from everywhere. It doesn't just have to be the senior management team. Doesn't just have to be the trustees or your high value donors who can influence you when it comes to putting together your strategy. You can get insights from all sorts of people, all sorts of connections that you have within your organisations. Maybe those are tenuous connections, but still it's worth crowdsourcing, worth bringing down the barriers that power and privilege puts in the way, and making sure they don't hinder your strategy that ends up not being inclusive, not being diverse, and not being equal. And so I would encourage you to create your strategy with others, so that there's a strategy that people want to own and feel part of, and that it's a strategy that reaches the wider audience that can really engage with what your organisation is doing. And that brings me to an end to the 4 areas. I thought it would be helpful just to bring some of that theory into practice, to encourage you all to take part in the exercise. It's there on the slide deck. You can either pause this video for around about 10 minutes and complete it, or you can do it in your own free time, whatever works for you. but it would be helpful if you could think about your organisation and some of those key principles we've been talking about, and write down something you can take forward which relate to the 4 principles of the fundraising strategy. So thinking about inclusivity, authenticity, simplicity and agility, and try to write something down from each area that's ideally smart that you can take forward in your organisation that will help you pull together this fundraising strategy.
So the next thing that I want to talk about is the fundraising cycle, and this is a tool that I've used on many occasions when thinking about fundraising strategy, and how an organisation can use things like that graph, understanding the context, and use the fundraising cycle to put in place the building blocks of an important fundraising strategy and a successful fundraising strategy. There are 4 elements to the cycle, so it is quite simple, but these elements are profound as well at the same time. And one of the key things to remember is that the fundraising cycle starts at the top, at the sort of the 12 o'clock point, with the case of support, and then you go around clockwise to audience, to making the ask, and then to monitoring and evaluation. The cycle does keep going round because you don't stop at monitoring and evaluation. That then has an impact on what your case of support is. And you sometimes do go backwards and forwards. It may be somewhat iterative. The case of support will dictate the audience, but then as you think about the audience, that may modify your case of support, and then you go back to your audience and you iterate around those 2 points until you're ready to then move on to thinking about making the ask. So whilst it is a cycle and generally goes in a clockwise direction, there's some flexibility on that. But the key thing is starting with the case of support rather than jumping in with deciding how you're going to make the ask, what sort of fundraising approaches you're going to make. Because if you try to think about your fundraising approaches without really thinking about your audience or the message that you take to them, then those fundraising approaches will not be very strong. Your case of support is critical, and we're going to spend a lot of the rest of this session thinking through your case of support. So I'm not going to dwell on that much more at this point, apart from just really emphasizing that that's the key place to start. Your case of support then helps you, though, to think about which audience is going to be the best one to respond to your case, and how might they do that. And there are really 5 types of audience to consider, 5 categories. The first one being statutory sources, typically through commissioned income, occasionally through grants, often through national government, but also from government bodies like the Department of Health or Department of Work and Pensions, or from local government through councils, through district councils, through county councils, through borough councils. All of these different sources of statutory funding, which is ultimately coming from taxpayer revenues, and government bodies are making decisions about how they allocate that. The second form of audience is individuals, people giving money from their own wallet, from their own back pocket, money that they've earned, for everything from cash in a collecting tin, when we were allowed to go out and put money in collecting tins, all the way through to large size donations, gifts in wills, or major multi-million pound donations from philanthropists, and everything in between, from individuals paying to go to events, paying to sponsor somebody to do something, making a regular donation through direct debit, paying for something in a charity shop. All of those things are where the audience is an individual, and you're approaching them in that capacity. The third area are grant-making trusts, organisations set up to give away money. They're charities which have to give away money for certain causes, and the job of a fundraiser and a fundraising strategy when you're thinking about trusts is finding how you can match the things which your charity does, but for which it needs money, with the things that the trust has money for, but that it's not able to do. So Grant Making Trust isn't able to do the charitable activity, it pays other charities to do that. You as a charity are able to do the charitable activity, but you need the money in order to make that happen. Trust fundraising is matchmaking between the two to find a synergy where the trust is able to use its grant to make the things happen that it wants to happen through you as an organisation. And where that synergy works, then that's all good. The fourth area is through non-profit organisations that give away money as a side product of what they do. So this would encompass all sorts of things, from schools to churches and synagogues and religious organisations, through to social organisations, from Rotary clubs and roundtables and other social groups like that, and even groups like the unions, which are set up not to make money but to serve a particular purpose for their stakeholders, but they may give away money as a byproduct to show their philanthropy, to show their community engagement, as a way to involve their members in doing some sort of meaningful activity, or in the case of schools to help to teach their students the importance of giving and supporting the communities around them. So approaching these audiences, it's about helping them to give away the money that they're raising, that they'd like to give away, but matching your cause to something that's relevant and meaningful to them. And then the fifth area, and actually the smallest area in terms of charitable income across the sector, generally roughly about 5%, is from the corporate world. So organisations that are set up to make money for their shareholders, whether those shareholders are directors or individuals or organisations who hold actual shares. And corporate world is therefore not really set up to give money away, but it does give money away where giving money away will affect the bottom line and help them to make more money, to help them to profit as well at the same time. And many organisations, many companies are recognising that they need to have an agenda now which isn't just about making profit, but it's about finding some sort of purpose in the profit that they're making as well, recognising that if they only exist to make profit, then they're probably damaging the world around them, the society or the environment, and so they need to do something which allays or offsets that damage, and doing that may be through spending money on charitable causes that are able to offset the damage that their profit making creates. So those are the five sources of funding, and your case of support will typically dictate the right way to go with your audience. A simple case of support will more likely appeal to individuals. For example, if you can express it in 280 characters in a tweet, then that's a way to go. Whereas a more complex, nuanced case of support will be better presented to a grant-making trust, where a committee of trustees will look at applications and ponder them and debate where they're going to give their funding, and will respond to the nuances that you're able to put across. So when you think about the case and the audience, then it's about your tactics. How are you going to make that ask? Which ask are you going to make first? Which audiences are you going to go to? What resources do you have to approach those audiences? How are you going to expend your resources to make that happen? Lots of questions go into the decision about how you make the ask, the order that you do it, the individuals, the personnel that are doing that on your behalf as a charity, and understanding also the sort of the timescales in terms of asking for legacy income is something that's going to take a long time to get a return, but when you do get that return, it might be quite significant. Whereas sending out a direct mail appeal is something that's going to get a fairly quick return, but maybe not a particularly substantial one, because most people may not respond positively to an appeal, but enough will that you do make a positive return on investment. So balancing up the lag time and the type of return on investment is also part of your strategy around making the ask. And then lastly, monitoring and evaluation is an important aspect to consider. If you don't know, if you're not monitoring how you're doing, how your ask is working, then you're not able to properly evaluate that, and you're not able to make decisions about which things you want to do more of, which things you want to do less of. And equally, you're not able to really know how the activities that you're doing, how your fundraising strategy is impacting on your case of support. If you are monitoring and evaluating properly, you'll know how much money you're raising and how much money you're likely to raise, and therefore how the gap which your case of support expressed in terms of the money you have and the money you need, how that gap is being reduced. But if you do understand how that gap is being reduced, then your case is changing. It's maybe becoming more urgent, or it's becoming the jeopardy is reducing, and you're able to maybe think about different audiences that you go to in order to bring in the last amounts of money that you need for a particular element of that case of support. Or as you raise enough money for one element of your case of support, that helps your charity, your trustees, your senior executive to expand the vision and think about new things that you could do, and therefore the case of support changes. The amount of money you need to raise also increases, and so you then need to think about different audiences that you can approach in order to raise that new money, and therefore new asks that you need to make in order to secure that funding. And so the cycle goes round and round and round, and that helps you to think about your strategy, but also to keep your strategy alive and vibrant, and meeting the context which you're working within. So I'm now going to hand over to Emma, who's going to think about some other principles when it comes to putting together a fundraising strategy.
Thanks, Dan. Now I am going to go in a little bit more detail about the case for support that Dan was talking a little bit about when he was explaining the fundraising cycle to you. And I guess I wanted to start off by thinking about, what is it really, and also, what's the big deal about it, and why is it so important? So just to define it, the case for support for your organisation is a statement that explains basically what your non-profit does, why it's important, and most importantly, why people should support it. And why is that so imperative? I've actually found a quote about the case for support that I think is able to describe the importance in a really good way, and that is, having the case is the gasoline that propels the vehicle. So I think that encapsulates it so well in the sense that it drives everything you do. It's your way of being able to say to people, why should they support you? Why should they give their hard-earned cash to you, and perhaps not another organisation? So it's really important that you get your case right, that it's right for the audience, it's motivating, and it's important that you should spend some time doing that. And writing a case and in some ways conveying your cause in just a few sentences can be in some ways quite overwhelming. So Dan and I thought it would be helpful to share some tools with you to help you compile that case. And these tools are tried and tested amongst fundraising professionals, and they can be used separately or interlinked. And we believe both are really useful ways to distill information to help you come up with your fundraising message. And you might want to use these tools in your organisation in order to maybe refine what you already have, or come up with something brand new. So I'm going to now, on the slide deck, go through the first tool. So the first tool I am going to talk you through is what I've used in the past, a really useful quadrant that allows you to identify which area your cause's particular case naturally sits in, and using a tool like this will help you really home in on what you want to say and provide some guidance, otherwise you may end up going sort of round and round in circles. And I mean, it's generally best to stick to one particular quadrant for your case, and not to deviate to another, as this will make your message more powerful. And once a quadrant has been identified, the charity can then go on, and it will help the charity draft their vision. It will give them some direction. So I'm going to talk you through each quadrant, which will hopefully help you. And I'm going to give some real life examples of where charities have adopted that particular quadrant, just to bring it to life a little bit. So the top left, looking at promoting the present positive. So in a nutshell, what this means is positioning your charity, stating what's happening now is good, and we want to preserve those things. So your message is very much, give us money, please support us in order to keep what we've got and keep it the way it is. So it's that kind of preserve message. And typically an organisation that might use this angle would be something like the National Trust or other conservation organisations that are looking after things in a good condition at the moment, and they want support in order to maintain what they currently have. And moving across to the top right, staying on the positive view of things, we're looking into the future. And this is thinking about organisations that are primarily telling people they want donations in order to help them create a positive future for their beneficiaries, so to inspire them. So an organisation that does this well would be the NSPCC, particularly the Full Stop campaign. A lot of emphasis on that campaign was what the future would be like when child cruelty had ended. And there was some emphasis on the negative side of child cruelty, but the focus was very much about inspiring people to give to achieve a positive future. And the case for support was very much leading in that direction. And then looking at the bottom left-hand side, we've got improve in the present negative. So we are saying things aren't good at the moment, but they could be better if we have donations. So give us money in order to improve what we have at the moment. So an organisation that's doing this quite well would be an organisation like Shelter or other homeless organisations, which are saying there's a problem with homelessness. The current situation isn't good enough. Please support us so we can change that and improve things. And you'll see there's some correlation there between present negative and the future positive. They're in fact two sides of the same coin. But it really depends on which ones you want to emphasise. Your emphasis really is the thing that focuses your case for support. And lastly, we have the bottom right box, future negative. So this is saying things might get worse in the future, and we want you to give us money so that we can prevent that happening or improve. So a good example would be Friends of the Earth presenting these sorts of messaging when they talk about climate change. So by 2030 things are likely to get a lot worse unless things are getting done about them right now. So there's a strong message of please support us in order to prevent some bad things happening in the future. And sometimes the prevent area can also be the other side of the coin of present positive. We've got something good now, so we want to keep it. So give us money to prevent that future negative happening. But again, Friends of the Earth and organisations like Greenpeace very much stay on the future negative, and a charity like National Trust on the present positive. So I hope you can see how organisations do skew their case for support to particularly emphasise one of these four options. And charities generally do pick one quadrant to focus their message, as it really is the most powerful, but some occasionally dip their toe in the water if they're thinking about amending their case in the future, which I'll show you with an example looking at the next tool. So the next toolkit I'm going to talk you through concerns 4 key pillars, specifically for your charity, and the pillars are the same for all charities, but the key thing is that the response will be different, and you can see on the slide there I've listed them out. So it's identifying the vision, the enemy, the hero, and the beneficiary for your particular organisation, and this will perhaps make a little bit more sense when we look at some real life examples. And it's useful to identify each area for your charity, as it will enable you to pull out your case of support from the responses. And you don't need to use all pillars, and some will be more relevant than others. Also, knowing what quadrant your charity sits in from the previous toolkit that I mentioned will help to angle your case too. So let's look at an example of the National Trust. So looking at the example I've shown here for the National Trust, who we identified from the last slide traditionally sit within the preserve category when angling their case. You can see on the slide here what I've picked out for each of the areas that's relevant specifically for that cause. And please do pause the video if you need a bit more time to look at these. Now, if we actually look at the actual case for support that's on their website, and please do pause the video if you need a bit more time to read. If we think about the 4 pillars that were on the previous slide, they've utilised the recipient answer of everyone, as the case refers to the people who will benefit, not just a specific group. They've also highlighted the enemy, referring to helping nature recover, which would suggest they're talking about the decay. I also wanted to highlight that the first sentence of their case feels like it sits within the preserve quadrant, but the second sentence is more inspire and prevent. So they may be testing a different angle in the future, which, as I said before, charities sometimes do this, but just be aware that it can be slightly risky, as a mixed message may not be as strong as one firm case in one quadrant. Just to give you another example, I wanted to look at a hospice, and that's because traditionally a hospice may sit in the preserve quadrant, continue to give us money in order for us to continue providing palliative care. But instead I've looked at a real life example of a capital appeal for hospice. They are looking to build a new hospital, a new hospice, because they've reached capacity and they can't get to everyone they want to. And this would sit in a different quadrant, and that would actually sit within the improve quadrant. So it would be, please support us to help improve the current negative situation. And I just wanted to demonstrate that the same charity can run a different appeal with a different case, which can sit in a different quadrant. So for this example of a hospice in Sussex asking for money to invest in a new building, you can see there what I've pulled out in each pillar, which will help the charity compile their case. And again, if you need a few seconds to read through the different areas, please do so. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And this is actually the case that's on their website. So again, if you want time to read this, please pause the slide. But you can see that their case, they're firmly in the improved quadrant. They're using their vision in terms of reaching everybody. the enemy in that they need more space because they've run out of space, and the hero in the building, as this will be the solution to their problems. So I hope that's helped you, or at least provided you with some tools to help distill your case for support to look at in a little bit more detail. I thought we would end this session just looking at an exercise which again will help you to put some of this theory into practice. So this exercise is around compiling a case for support. So very much like the exercise we had before, you can pause this video for around about 10 minutes and complete the exercise, or you can do it in your own time. So it would be of interest, I hope, and helpful to you to have a go at plotting the quadrant your charity sits best in, and have a go and have a play at writing the vision. And following on from that, use the 4-pillar model to write down how the hero, enemy and beneficiary link in with that vision, and that will hopefully help you start thinking about your case for support for your organisation.
So we've thought about the case of support, the vision that goes into that case of support, and also some of the things that are important to your audience in terms of how they understand that case of support, the enemy, the beneficiary, and also the person, the hero, who is helping to make that case happen. I want to spend a few minutes just considering how fundraising messaging is different, subtly different to general brand marketing of a charity, because I think that's helpful just to wrap up this session on strategy and help you consider where fundraising messaging differs from the overall messaging of a charity. So some of the things that are specific about fundraising messaging: it's donor focused. You hopefully will have seen from the things that we've been talking about and how you thought about audiences that there are very clear audiences that you are approaching with a fundraising message, and those audiences, those donors and potential donors, need to hear specific things about your case of support. So you are, in your fundraising messaging, you are very clear on who your audience is, and you're focused on persuading people who either haven't considered being a donor to your organisation, or are a donor but you want them to potentially give again. You're interested in persuading them to part with their cash and invest or give their funds to your organisation to enable you to do more things. So there's a very clear agenda when it comes to fundraising messaging, which is maybe different to some brand marketing. The other clear thing from your fundraising messaging is that it's about articulating issues, and with that it is often showing vulnerability. So the issues that you talk about when fundraising are maybe not always the things that you talk about when you're generally marketing the brand of your charity. Take an example of the hospice that Emma has been referring to. In many ways, the messages that the hospice would want to present wouldn't always be focused on the fact that the current building isn't sufficient, isn't at a high enough standard, and that they're not able to provide the full service that they would want to provide. For beneficiaries, current beneficiaries, that's not necessarily the ideal message that they should hear, and there are many things that the hospice would want to say to demonstrate to their beneficiaries that the services that they're providing are of excellent quality and are exactly what their beneficiaries need. But when it comes to talking to donors, they want to expand their vision. They want to help them to think about the issues that they're facing, that where the hospice is now and where it wants to be in the future is different, and there is a vulnerability there because there is a weakness that if the hospice doesn't build a new hospice inpatient unit, then it won't be able to continue to offer the kinds of services that it feels it should be offering to its beneficiaries. So fundraising messages always have those issues, have those vulnerabilities in them, talk about the things that the charity can't do at the moment, and that's different to brand marketing. And so that means that the fundraising message has limited context. It's not for every audience, it's not for every time, it's not for every occasion. and it's important to work out what those limited contexts are and what the fundraising messaging should be in that context. So the converse is that brand marketing is often beneficiary focused, or sometimes focused on other stakeholders who aren't particularly donors and aren't beneficiaries, but are key to helping the organization to deliver its mission. And the brand marketing is generally talking about solutions and showing strength. It shows what the charity can do, it shows how the charity does that well, it shows how the charity solves problems and makes things better. And that messaging is often talking in the full context of what the charity does. So it's all about everything that the charity does. It's the whole remit, and it will talk about things that maybe aren't even relevant to donors, and donors don't need to get involved with, because it's trying to present messaging which is appropriate for a wide range of audiences. And so often what fundraisers will try to do in order to work closely with their marketing colleagues and their communication colleagues is think particularly about this sweet spot, the overlapping areas in the Venn diagram where there are shared audiences, where it's possible to articulate issues and solutions at the same time, and where there's a shared context which works for the fundraising audience and the general charity audience for its brand marketing. And a really successful case of support is one of those cases of support that does fall in this shared area, and indeed some fundraising charities will find that the overlap is particularly large, and the areas that are just brand marketing or just fundraising messaging are relatively small. But the important thing is to understand the similarities and to understand the differences, and not to be hung up on those or not be constrained by those, but to be able to use both to your advantage. So I hope that's been useful and presents a good way to understand how your case of support should be articulated in your charity. So we've reached the end of this video, and I'm just going to summarize the different things that we've talked about, just to think over the different areas that you've been learning. Firstly, we talked about the importance of having a strategy and having a plan of where you're going to go, to be like the boat on the left with its sails billowing, rather than the boat on the right which was up on the rocks and going nowhere. And the work we've looked at in developing a fundraising strategy will help you to do that. Emma talked about the importance of having fundraising strategies that are flexible and living, about the need to be agile, simple, authentic and inclusive, and getting these 4 elements right will help you to come up with a strategy that will work now and will continue to work as you respond and adapt to the world around you. We spent a lot of time talking about the case for support. We built it up from the fundraising cycle, and we focused on the need to get the case of support right. If you know what it is that you're asking for funding for, and you can articulate that well and to the right audiences, then you'll be very successful in your fundraising. And we went through several different models of how you can create that case for support, the 4 pillars model, and thinking about the 4 quadrants and your future or present focus and your positive or negative slant on that. And then lastly, we've had a little bit of a discussion around mixing messages or not mixing messages more precisely within your charity communications, and that marketing messages and fundraising messages are not always the same, and it's important to understand when fundraising messages need to be presented and how they can do that. So in summary, we hope that this has been a useful and helpful video, and that it will contain lots of useful content that will enable you to create successful and ongoing fundraising strategies, particularly at this current time when the charity sector is finding it much harder to raise money and much harder to engage with the wider population due to coronavirus.
Well, that brings our presentation to an end. I hope you've enjoyed the content that we've gone through today, and you've managed to pick up some bits and pieces that you can take forward within your own organisations to ultimately generate more income for your charities. If you would like to ask any questions related to the presentation, or perhaps have other areas of work within fundraising you'd like to chat through, don't hesitate to contact Dan or I. Our contact details are there on the slide, along with our Twitter feed as well. So yes, please do get in contact with us if we'd love to speak to you. And thanks again for listening. Take care.